So before we get into things, I just wanted to mention a few things up front. First of all, this video, in a way, is going to be a follow-up to my previous video, the next Sonic game and the current state of things. So you may want to watch that video first if you haven't already, as I'll be building upon some of my points and some of the information I shared in that video. Speaking of that video, I also just wanted to take a moment to say thanks to all of you who watched it. Since I uploaded it, it's gone on to become the overall most successful video on my entire channel. I know it's not much in the grand scheme of things, especially when it comes to YouTube as a whole, but it means a lot to me. It's nice to see that those of you who watched it found it interesting and enjoyed it as much as you have. It's also nice to see it's gotten around as much as it has. I'm glad it became a bit of a starting point for discussion, and thanks to all of you who commented and brought your own thoughts to the table. That's part of the fun of these videos after all. So again, thank you all, and I hope I can continue to make videos that will cause discussion as well as intrigue and entertain. So with all that being said, let's get into the topic at hand. So I've already talked about the next Sonic game and what it could possibly be. I've also shared what little we currently know about it. However, something I haven't talked about is what I think the potential of the next Sonic game could be. Now, much like how discussing what the next Sonic game might be is uncertain, discussing what the potential of the next Sonic game might be is even more uncertain. Regardless, I still think it's an interesting discussion to have, as there are things we can look into that could help bring to light what the potential of the next game could be. As I've shared previously, we already know that the next mainline Sonic game is already in development, and thanks to statements from Sonic series producer Takashi Iizuka, we have reason to expect that it will be released sometime in 2021 to coincide with the series' 30th anniversary, which would set the next game up to have around 3 to 4 years of development time, roughly about the same amount of development time that Forces had. Now, despite how Forces turned out, even with its longer development time, I still feel that there are reasons to think that the next game can fare much better. One of those reasons, I feel, lies in the form of the Hedgehog Engine 2. With Sonic Forces, we were introduced to the Hedgehog Engine 2, a successor to the original Hedgehog Engine that was introduced back in 2008 with the release of Sonic Unleashed. Game engines, or in the case of the Hedgehog Engine, lighting engines, can take a fair bit of time to make, and I imagine the Hedgehog Engine 2 was no different. While we don't know how long it took to create the Hedgehog Engine 2, I think it's safe to assume it took at least a year or two to make. As a result, I think there's a possibility that development of the Hedgehog Engine 2 could have impacted the overall development time of Forces, and ultimately took away time that could have been put into making the actual game itself. This is something I feel will likely not be a problem for the next game, or any future game that may use the engine, as the engine has already been made and all the work has already been done. Even if they decide to make tweaks and improvements to the engine for future games, which they likely will as they've done it before, it's likely they'll be able to make and implement them fairly quickly without taking much time away from the rest of development. With work on the Hedgehog Engine 2 done, and with this next game set to have around a 3 to 4 year development cycle, something else I feel it could have the benefit of having is an overall more focused development. Having a more focused development cycle and a focused vision could greatly help the next game as well as future ones. This could lead to things such as a more focused and realized story, better implemented features and gameplay mechanics, more fully realized ideas, etc. Sonic games in the past, at least to some, have had a sense of ideas and concepts that are good on paper but are either not fully realized or are just not pushed to their fullest potential. If Sonic Team can achieve a more focused development like this for the next game, I think they could have something really special on their hands. Another thing, and something that I've thought about that I don't think many are even considering, is the possibility of the next game being a next-gen title. With next-gen consoles set to release by the end of 2020, and this next game currently expected to release sometime in 2021, possibly in November, I think it's possible that this next game could see release on next-gen platforms. If the next game does see release on next-gen systems, it could very much see to benefit from the more powerful hardware, and it could allow them to push the game in directions they may not have been able to otherwise. However, while the timelines do line up, and while I do think it could at least be a possibility, I ultimately don't know how likely it is. We've seen a few times in the past where Sonic games could have released on new consoles, but ultimately didn't. Lost World released around a month before the PS4 and Xbox One did, and Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric released around a year after the PS4 and Xbox One. Yet neither game ever saw release on those platforms. I'm aware both games were part of an exclusivity contract between Sega and Nintendo, and when it comes to Boom specifically, there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, but still, I think you get my point. There's also no guarantee that Sonic Team would end up taking much advantage of the more powerful hardware in the first place, considering Forces was the first Sonic Team developed Sonic game to release on current-gen platforms, and I wouldn't exactly say the game was pushing those platforms to their limits. Another factor is that even if the next game gets a next-gen release, it could end up as a cross-gen game and could still see release on current platforms anyway. Again, I ultimately don't know how likely this all is, but I think it could at least be a possibility and is worth taking into consideration. However, despite everything I've said thus far, the potential of the next Sonic game isn't just going to be found in behind-the-scenes happenings and in the development cycle. It will also be found in more obvious areas, such as gameplay. First of all, it will depend on what the gameplay formula of the next game is going to be. Will Sonic Team continue with the boost formula, revisit the adventure formula, whether it be remake or otherwise, or will they go with something entirely new? As I've said before, I still think there's potential left in the boost formula, and I still feel there are ways that it can be implemented and ways that they can push the formula that we haven't seen yet. There are things Sonic Team can learn from the criticisms of Forces, and ways that they can improve upon what they currently have. That is, if they continue with the boost style of gameplay. One concern I have if they adopt a new gameplay style that is different from the boost, is that significant pieces of feedback from the boost games, especially Forces, could ultimately go unutilized. Seeing as if they try to go with something new, it could prove difficult to incorporate feedback from games that had a different gameplay style from what they would be trying to make. It would be like trying to take feedback from Unleashed and incorporate it into Lost World. Some things might be able to be carried over, but likely not everything. This could also lead to some mistakes from the boost games being repeated as well. However, despite that concern, there is still obviously a lot of potential in Sonic Team going with a new gameplay style for the next game, should they choose to do so. As for them revisiting the adventure style, it kinda depends. We've seen the adventure formula take different forms in the past, so it's hard to say what direction Sonic Team would go in if they brought it back. Would they try to replicate Adventure 1 and 2 as much as possible? Would they lean more towards how a game like 06 handled the adventure formula? Or would they come up with some new version of it? If they were to revisit the adventure formula, I think it would make sense for them to go in some kind of new direction with it. I can see them doing something similar to what 06 did with the formula by having the same basic story and gameplay structure as the adventure games, but without being one-to-one recreations of them. I feel it could be a good middle ground. It would allow them to finally bring back the adventure formula at its core, but still be able to go in new directions with it. They also wouldn't have to be as concerned with recreating and living up to the original adventure formula. Of course, this is assuming they'll even revisit the adventure formula in the first place. As I said earlier, discussing what the potential of the next Sonic game might be is uncertain, and ultimately there's only so far a discussion like this can go. With much still currently unknown about the next game, there's only so much we can go off of, and only so much we can reasonably assume. In the end, only time will reveal the answers we're looking for, but for all we can do now is discuss, which is why I pass this discussion on to you. What potential do you think the next Sonic game might have? What things do you think could affect it? Do you even see potential in the next game? Let me know what you think. Thank you all for watching, and as always, have a great night and take care.